What if the one person you saved was the only one who could save you? In the raw, biting cold of the Arizona Territory, a brutal blizzard traps a poor, lonely girl in her crumbling cabin. A knock comes, faint against the howl of the wind. The man on her doorstep is half dead, freezing, and looks like he hasn't seen a kind day in his life. She lets him in, offering her last scraps of food. She thinks he's a lost drifter, an outcast Apache. She has no idea that the man shivering by her fire is Kalen Blackwood, one of the richest, most powerful men in the West, and that her simple act of kindness has just lit the fuse on a powder keg of greed, betrayal, and a secret hidden right under her own land. The wind didn't just whistle, it screamed. It was a living, breathing monster clawing at the flimsy wooden walls of Eliza Mayhew's cabin, a white-fanged wolf of a storm that had descended on the high desert of the Arizona Territory with shocking, unseasonal fury. It was November, and while a chill was expected, this was a blizzard ripped straight from the northern plains. Eliza, at 19, felt more like 90. She pulled her father's threadbare wool blanket tighter around her shoulders, the material so worn you could see the flicker of her meager fire right through it. The cabin, 3 miles from the nearest, and equally desolate neighbor, and a full day's ride from the town of Wilcox, was her inheritance. It consisted of 1 room, a rusted-out stove, a leaky roof, and 20 acres of sun-baked land that stubbornly refused to grow anything but rocks and regret. She was alone. Her father, a good man with a weak constitution and a fondness for bad investments, had been buried on the hill out back 2 years prior. Her mother, a memory as faded as her one good dress, had died long before that. Eliza was a creature of stubborn survival. She had her father's rifle, a handful of chickens that were probably freezing to death in their coop, and a mule that was, at this moment, wisely huddled in the attached lean-to. She also had a debt. A shadow had been stretching over her land long before the blizzard, and it had a name: Silas Croft. Croft was a man who owned valleys the way other men owned boots. He'd been buying up all the worthless parcels in the area, and hers was the last. He'd offered her $50. She'd refused. Now, the county tax bill, a bill Croft had conveniently reminded the assessor about, was due. $50. It might as well have been $5,000. Scritch. Scrape. Eliza froze, the tin cup of watery broth halfway to her lips. It wasn't the wind. The wind howled. This was a sound, a human sound. Scritch. Scrape. Thud. A heavy weight slumped against her door, rattling the frame. Fear, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. No one traveled in this. No sane person. Bandits, perhaps. Or one of Croft's men, sent to scare her out. She grabbed the rifle from its pegs by the door. Her hands, chapped and red, trembled, but her grip was firm. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice barely a croak against the storm's roar. A muffled groan was the only answer, a sound so broken it seemed to be part of the wind itself. She waited. The silence stretched, filled only by the wind and her own hammering heart. Was he dead? Or waiting? She edged closer, peering through a crack in the warped doorframe. All she could see was a mass of dark, wet snow, a shape. "If you're here for trouble, I've got a Winchester loaded with regret," she yelled, trying to sound braver than she felt. Another groan, weaker this time. "Please." Cold. The word was a shard of ice, barely audible. "Please." It wasn't the voice of one of Croft's thuggish ranch hands. It was the voice of something spent. Eliza was a survivor, but she wasn't cruel. Her father had always said, Mercy costs nothing, Eliza, and it's the only currency that matters. Right now, it felt like it could cost her everything. She took a deep breath, unlatched the heavy wooden bar, and cracked the door open an inch. The wind ripped it from her hand, slamming it wide open with a crash. A blast of stinging ice and snow filled the cabin, extinguishing her small lantern and scattering the embers in her hearth. And there, collapsing onto her floor in a heap of snow, animal skins, and mud, was a man. He was, she thought, Apache. His skin was a deep copper, his hair long and matted with ice. He was dressed in worn-out buckskins, not the clothes of a townsfolk. He was also, she noted, with a second jolt of fear, wounded. A dark, ugly stain was spreading across his left shoulder, a tear in the hide that looked suspiciously like a bullet graze. He rolled onto his back, his eyes fluttering open. They were dark, assessing, and full of a pain that went deeper than the cold. He looked at her, at the rifle she was still pointing at his chest, and then at the meager, empty room. A small, ironic smile touched his cracked lips. Then his eyes rolled back, and he was still. For a long moment, Eliza Mayhew just stood there, the blizzard raging into her home, the rifle in her hands, and a half-dead, possibly dangerous stranger bleeding on her floor. "Damn it all," she whispered. She slammed the door against the storm, dropped the bar back in place, and dragged the man, who was far heavier than he looked, toward the flickering remnants of her fire. She had just let a freezing Apache stay for the night. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that she had just dragged a millionaire, a phantom, and her own destiny in from the cold. The man on her floor was Kalen Blackwood, and his arrival was about to change everything. The storm didn't just trap them, it entombed them. For 2 full days, the world beyond Eliza's cabin ceased to exist, replaced by the white, howling void. The first night was a blur of survival. Eliza, running on pure, terrified adrenaline, worked with a grim efficiency. First, she relit the fire, using precious kindling until it roared back to life, fighting the icy drafts that snaked through the floorboards. Then, the man. She dragged him closer to the warmth, her muscles straining. He was built like a panther, lean but packed with a wiry strength that was apparent even in his unconscious state. She got her sharpest knife and, with a deep breath, cut away the stiff, frozen buckskin from his shoulder. The wound was what she'd suspected. A bullet graze, long and deep, carving a channel of raw flesh along his shoulder and upper arm. It was sluggishly bleeding, inflamed, and already showing the first signs of fever infection. It wasn't a fresh wound, maybe a day or 2 old. He'd been riding with this, through this, before the cold finally claimed him. "You're a fool," she muttered, as much to herself as to him. She used her cleanest rags, and the last of her good whiskey, the bottle she kept for snake bites and bad memories, to clean the wound. He hissed in his unconsciousness, a deep, guttural sound, and his hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. His grip was like a steel trap. Eliza cried out, dropping the rag. His eyes snapped open. They were black, bottomless, and utterly feral. He wasn't seeing her. He was seeing a threat. He was halfway to sitting up, his good arm tensed to strike, before his gaze focused. He saw her face, the fear in her eyes, the rag in her other hand. He saw the rifle, resting against the wall just a few feet away, well within her reach. Slowly, deliberately, he released her wrist. The cabin was silent, save for the wind. He didn't say, "Thank you." He didn't say, "Sorry." He just held her gaze, a silent, tense negotiation. "I'm not," Eliza said, her voice shaking, "going to hurt you, but I'm not going to be hurt by you either. We clear?" He gave a single, sharp nod. He looked at his shoulder, then at the whiskey. He grunted, a sound of pained acceptance, and lay back down, his jaw clenched tight. She worked quickly after that. She stitched the wound closed with her own mending needle and thread, sterilizing both in the fire, and packed it with a poultice of yarrow and sage she kept for the mule. He didn't make another sound, but a fine sheen of sweat broke out on his brow. When she was done, she backed away, her heart thumping. "There's broth," she said, nodding to the pot. He sat up, slower this time, and took the cup she offered. He drank it in 3 gulps, his eyes never leaving her. He finished, holding the empty cup. "My name is Eliza Mayhew," she offered, deciding it was better than silence. The stranger looked into the fire. His face, in the flickering light, was hard. It was a face carved from the same rock as the mountains outside, all sharp angles and deep shadows. He wasn't handsome in the way of the men in Wilcox, but there was a power in him, a stillness that was more intimidating than any bluster. "Cale?" he said. His voice was a low rumble, rough from disuse. "Just Cale?" "Just Cale," he confirmed. He didn't offer a last name, and she didn't dare ask. They settled into a strange, domestic truce. The storm made any thought of him leaving impossible. He was a presence, a dark, quiet, and profoundly male presence in her tiny, isolated world. He slept for most of the first day, a deep, healing sleep. When he was awake, he watched. He watched her mend her clothes. He watched her measure out their dwindling supplies, a handful of beans, a sliver of salt pork, a half cup of cornmeal. He watched her check the door, her gaze lingering on the rifle. On the second day, the fever broke. Kyle woke with clear eyes. He swung his legs off the small cot she'd given him. She'd taken the hard floor by the fire, and stood. He was wobbly, but he stood. "Wood," he said, gesturing to her near-empty wood box. "You're in no shape," she started. "Wood," he repeated. He picked up his own knife, a long, wicked-looking blade she hadn't noticed before, from his belt, and went to the door. "The storm." "It's a lull," he said. And he was right. The screaming had quieted to a low, angry moan. He unbarred the door, waded into the chest-deep drift outside, and made his way to the lean-to. Eliza watched from the window, rifle in hand, as he brute-forced his way to her woodpile. He found her axe, and with his one good arm, began to split the half-frozen logs. The thwack of the axe was a sharp, reassuring sound against the wind. He worked for an hour, his movements economical and powerful, before hauling a full load inside and stacking it neatly. He didn't ask for thanks. He just did it. They ate in silence. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken questions. To fill the void, Eliza found herself talking. She told him about the cabin, about her father. And, without meaning to, she told him about Silas Croft. "He wants this land," she said, her voice bitter as she stared into her empty cup. "Thinks it's worthless, but he wants it. Owns the bank, owns the sheriff, owns the whole valley, except this little patch." Kyle, who'd been staring into the fire, turned his head. His eyes were sharp. "Why this patch?" "Pride, I suppose. My pa never bowed to him. Now I won't. But," she hesitated, "he's won. He's coming tomorrow. The storm's got to break eventually. He's coming with the county assessor and Sheriff Brody. Coming to serve the final notice. I'm short. $50. For the taxes." She laughed, a dry, harsh sound. $50, and he'll get my land for it. He'll be here tomorrow. Christmas in November for Silas Croft. Cale's face was unreadable. He looked at her chapped hands, at the fear she was trying so hard to hide. Silas Croft, he repeated, testing the name. You know him? Cale looked back at the fire. A log popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. I know the type, he said, his voice flat. But that was a lie. Kalen Blackwood knew the name Silas Croft very well. Croft was a persistent, small-time speculator who had been sending increasingly desperate telegrams to the San Francisco offices of the Blackwood Mining and Land Company. He was trying to sell a massive, consolidated parcel of land in the Arizona Territory. Land he claimed was vital for a new railroad spur. Kyle, traveling incognito to escape the suffocating world of boardrooms and lawyers, had been scouting the territory himself. He'd been ambushed by a rival's men, the source of his bullet wound, and then caught in the blizzard. He looked at Eliza, who was anxiously recounting her chicken feed. He had a sudden, sinking feeling. The land Silas Croft was trying to sell to him was this land he didn't even own yet, land he was planning to steal from a girl for $50. Tomorrow, you said? Kyle asked, his voice a low growl. Tomorrow, she whispered, her shoulders slumping. Soon as the snow clears. Then we'd better get some rest, Cale said. He stood and walked to the window, peering out into the white nothingness. Because tomorrow, he added, more to himself than to her, is going to be a very interesting day. The morning of the third day, the world was born anew, and it was blinding. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine, deadly silence. The sky was an impossible, piercing blue, and the sun on the fresh snow was so bright it hurt to look at. Eliza woke with a knot of dread in her stomach. The silence of the cabin told her Cale was already up. She found him in the lean-to, checking on her mule, Stubbs. The animal, which normally shied from everyone, was placidly letting Kyle check a loose shoe. He's smart, Kyle noted, giving the mule a final pat. Headed for the rocks when the wind picked up. Saved himself. Headed for the rocks? Eliza asked, confused. He was in here. Cale just looked at her. No. I found him in that little box canyon behind the house, tucked under the overhang. He knew where to go. Smart animal. Eliza frowned, but her thoughts were derailed by a sound. Far off, but drawing nearer, the crunch of hooves on fresh snow. The dread in her stomach turned to ice. They're here. Cale's face hardened. He moved to the window. Two riders, black specks against the white, were picking their way up the trail. Stay inside, he ordered. Bar the door behind me. What? They've got the law with them. You can't. I'm not going to fight them, Eliza, he said, his voice clipped. I'm going to watch. Now do it. He slipped out the door before she could argue, melting into the shadows of the lean-to. Heart pounding, Eliza dropped the heavy bar in place. She felt like a mouse in a trap. The riders pulled up. The first was Silas Croft, and he was everything Eliza hated. He sat on a magnificent black stallion, his saddle gleaming with polished silver. He wore a thick buffalo hide coat and an expensive beaver pelt hat. His face was fleshy and pink, his eyes small and shrewd. The man beside him was Sheriff Brody. Brody was a thin, tired-looking man who always seemed to be apologizing with his posture. He was, Eliza knew, a weak man, not a bad one, which was almost worse. He was a man who followed the lead of stronger, richer men. Miss Mayhew, Croft called out, his voice booming with false, oily joviality. A glorious morning. I do hope the storm wasn't too hard on you. Eliza opened the door, stepping out into the cold. She held her father's rifle, but kept it pointed at the ground. Mr. Croft. Sheriff, she said, her voice flat. Eliza, Sheriff Brody said, looking at his saddle horn, not at her. We've come about the taxes, the delinquency notice. I know why you're here, Croft chuckled, a sound like rocks grinding together. My dear girl, there's no need for this unpleasantness. It's a simple transaction. You can't pay. The county seizes the land. To save you the shame of a public auction, I have generously offered to pay the county myself and take this worthless plot off your hands. I have the papers right here. $50, as agreed by the assessor. A paltry sum, but then it's a paltry piece of dirt. He was enjoying this. He was preening, performing for the sheriff and for the shadows. And if I say no? Eliza asked, her hands white-knuckling the rifle. Croft's smile tightened. Then Sheriff Brody here seizes the property, puts a lock on that door, and escorts you to the edge of the county. You'll be a vagrant, Miss Mayhew. With winter truly setting in? Well, he didn't have to finish the thought. It's my father's land, she whispered, a last, desperate plea. And your father, Croft sneered, was a fool. He died broke, and he left you the same. Sign the paper, Eliza. Take the $50 and buy yourself a stage ticket to anywhere else. He pulled a document from his saddlebag and a pencil. Eliza felt the tears welling, hot and angry. She would not cry, not in front of him. What's this now? Croft's head snapped up. Cale had stepped out of the lean-to. He was a terrifying sight. His black hair was loose, his copper skin stark against the snow. He wore the patched-up, blood-stained buckskins, and his dark eyes were flat and cold as a frozen lake. He looked every inch the savage Croft had been raised to fear. Sheriff Brody instinctively reached for his sidearm. Croft's eyes widened, and then he burst into laughter, a loud, ugly, braying sound. Well, well, Eliza, you've taken in a pet. I didn't think you had it in you. A stray, is he? A reservation dog? Get this half-breed trash off my property. It's not your property, Cale said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the morning air like a razor. Is that so? Croft's good humor vanished, replaced by a venomous sneer. Sheriff, it seems we have a vagrant and a squaw man. I want him arrested. Sheriff Brody drew his gun, but he looked uncertain. Son, I don't want no trouble. This is official county business. And he's a trespasser, Croft added, on my land. It's not your land until I sign, Eliza said, finding her voice. She stepped forward, placing herself between Cale and the sheriff's gun. He's my guest. Croft's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. He was, for the first time, genuinely angry. He'd been made to look foolish. Your guest? He spat. You're shacking up with an Apache drifter? Your father would be so proud. Fine. Have it your way. Sheriff, deliver the notice. Sheriff Brody cleared his throat, avoiding everyone's gaze. Eliza Mayhew, as of 10 o'clock this morning, you are in default. You have 24 hours to produce the sum of $50 and file it at the county clerk's office in Wilcox. If you fail to do so, this property is forfeit. Mr. Croft here holds the lien. It's done, Eliza. I'm sorry. He tacked a piece of paper to her door, a white flag of her surrender. 24 hours, Croft said, his smile back in place. And it's a long, cold walk to Wilcox. I, however, will be at the Golden Nugget Saloon, nice and warm, waiting to sign the final deed. Don't keep me waiting. He tipped his expensive hat to her, a final mocking gesture. And Coil, was it? I'd be off this land by sundown if I were you. The snow makes it real easy to mistake a man for a wolf. And I do hate wolves. Croft wheeled his horse around, spraying snow, and trotted away, whistling. Sheriff Brody lingered a moment. Eliza, you should have just signed. Get off my land, Sheriff, Eliza said, her voice shaking with a rage that surprised her. Brody flinched and hurried to follow his master. Eliza stood, watching them go, until they were just specks again. The paper on her door fluttered in the breeze. She'd been strong for as long as she could, but the fight had gone out of her. She slumped onto the porch step, buried her face in her hands, and finally, she wept. Cale stood over her, a silent, unmoving guardian. He watched the riders disappear. He watched Eliza's shoulders shake. He looked at the vast, white, silent landscape. He called it worthless dirt, Cale said, his voice thoughtful. It is, Eliza sobbed, her voice muffled. It's just rocks and dirt. No, Cale said, his gaze turning to the small, hidden box canyon behind the cabin, the place her mule had hidden. I don't think it is. Get your coat, Eliza. Show me where Stubbs spent the storm. Eliza, her face raw from the cold and her tears, looked up at him, bewildered. What? Why? It's just a rock overhang. It's where Pa and I... Her voice broke. Get your coat, Kyle commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. He went into the cabin, grabbed her father's thickest coat, and tossed it to her. He checked his own mended shoulder, winced, and then grabbed her rifle. I've got a shovel in the lean-to, she mumbled, pulling on the coat. We won't need it. He led the way. The snow was deep, but he moved with a purpose, breaking a trail for her. He walked past the lean-to, around the small, rocky hill that sheltered the cabin from the north wind, and into the mouth of a narrow canyon she hadn't been to in months. It was, as she had said, just a collection of rocks. A small, tight box canyon, maybe 50 yards deep and 20 across. At the back, a high red rock wall curved inward, creating a natural overhang. It was this that had saved her mule. The snow had drifted deep at the mouth, but the back was almost clear, sheltered from the storm. See, she said, her voice dead. Nothing, just rocks. Cale wasn't listening. He was scanning the back wall, his head tilted. You hear that? He asked. Eliza stilled. The world was silent. Hear what? The wind? No, listen. She held her breath, and then she heard it. Faint. So faint, she had always mistaken it for the wind in the high pines. A low, rhythmic gurgle, a trickle. Cale walked to the back wall. It was covered in a thick, ancient carpet of dried moss and winter-dead vines. He reached out with his good hand, grabbed a handful of the tangle, and pulled. The wall of vines came away in a sheet, revealing a dark, shadowed cleft in the rock. And from that cleft, tumbling over a seriski of black, glistening stones, came water. It wasn't a geyser. It wasn't a river. It was a spring, but it was the most powerful, consistent spring Eliza had ever seen. It poured from the rock, clear and fast, into a deep stone-lined pool before vanishing back into the rock, into some underground aquifer. It was a self-contained, year-round, permanent water source. Eliza's jaw dropped. Pa told me. He said there was water, but I thought he was just telling stories. He called it the heart of the mountain. He wasn't, Cale said, his voice hushed. He knelt by the pool, dipped his hand in, and brought the water to his lips. It's sweet, and it's warm. The spring was thermal. Not hot, but just warm enough that it had kept the entire back of the canyon from freezing solid. It was an oasis. This, Cale said, standing up, is why Silas Croft wants your land. This isn't worthless dirt, Eliza. This is the only water for 20 miles. The only water. Eliza's mind was racing. The railroad. People say the new spur is coming through this valley. Forget the railroad, Kyle said. The railroad needs water. A town needs water. 1,000 head of cattle need water. This spring doesn't just make your land valuable. It makes this whole valley valuable. Whoever controls this spring controls everything. He stared at the pool, his reflection looking back at him. He's not trying to steal your land for $50. He's trying to steal a fortune for $50. The full weight of it hit Eliza. The years of poverty, the sneers, the worthless label. It had all been a lie. A lie to keep her poor and desperate so she'd finally break and sell. That thief, she spat, a new, white-hot fury replacing her grief. He was going to leave me to die in the snow, all for this. Yes, Cale said. He was no longer looking at the water. He was looking at the rock wall beside it. He ran his fingers over the stone. Eliza, who were your father's people? Where was he from? I don't know, she stammered, confused by the question. Back east. Why? Cale didn't answer. He was tracing a series of faint, almost invisible carvings in the rock, shapes half worn away by time and water. They were hidden by the vines, but they were undeniably man-made. There was a sun, a spiral, a figure with outstretched arms. Cale's breath hitched. His hand, the one that had gripped her wrist, was now trembling. He traced a specific symbol, a zigzag line that represented lightning or a snake. What is it? Eliza asked, moving closer. What do they mean? Cale turned to her. The hard, cold mask of the drifter was gone. His face was something else, full of a raw, aching pain and a dawning, terrible understanding. This is not a canyon, he said, his voice thick. This is a wasiki, a holy place. My mother's people, the Chiricahua, they were here. He touched the carving again, a gesture of such profound reverence it made Eliza's throat tighten. My mother, he said, his voice barely a whisper. She was taken in a raid when she was a girl. She spent her whole life in civilization. But before she died, she told me about the heart of the mountain, a place where the water was warm and the spirit spoke. He looked at Eliza. She thought it was just a fever dream from her childhood, a lost memory. He placed his palm flat against the rock. It's real. She was here. This was her home. The millionaire Kalen Blackwood had come to Arizona to scout land for a railroad, to expand his empire. But the drifter, Cale, had stumbled, half dead, onto the one piece of land on the continent that meant more to him than all his gold. He was no longer just a man helping a woman. He was a son, standing on his own stolen, sacred ground. He turned away from the spring, his face once again a mask of cold resolve. But his eyes were on fire. Croft isn't just a thief, he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He's a gravedigger, and he's not taking this land. But Cale, we only have 24 hours, Eliza said, the panic returning. We have no money. We have no anything. I have money, Cale said. Eliza blinked. What? Not here, he said impatiently, but I can get it. I have an account with the Western Telegraph Company. I can wire for funds. Wire? Cale, that's for rich men. That's for Mr. Croft. Yes, Cale said, grabbing the rifle from her, which is why we have to get to Wilcox, now. Wilcox? That's a day's ride. We'll never make it in time, and Stubbs can't carry us both." "We aren't taking the mule," Cale said, walking to the mouth of the canyon and scanning the horizon. He pointed to a small ranch, nestled in the next valley over, miles away, but visible from their vantage point. "That's Croft's main ranch, isn't it?" "Yes, the Double C, but—" "He left 2 horses. He was arrogant. He thinks you're a beaten woman, and I'm a half-wit drifter." "He's right," Eliza cried. "I am beaten." Kyle grabbed her by the shoulders, his good hand biting into her coat, his dark eyes locked onto hers. "No, you are not. You are the woman who survived out here alone for 2 years. You are the woman who pulled a stranger from a blizzard and stitched him up, even though he might have been dangerous. You are not beaten. You are angry. Now use it. We're going to that saloon in Wilcox. We're going to see Mr. Croft. But what about his horses? We can't just—" "Mr. Croft has a black stallion," Cale said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face for the first time. "I've always wanted to ride a black stallion." The ride to Wilcox was a frozen hell. Kyle was, it turned out, a horseman of breathtaking skill. He'd slipped into Croft's property like a ghost, calming the 2 horses with a low-voiced murmur. He'd borrowed the magnificent black stallion for himself and put Eliza on the sheriff's more docile mare. They rode without stopping, pushing the animals and themselves to the limit. The deep snow made the trail treacherous, but Cale seemed to know the land, finding ridges swept clean by the wind and avoiding the deep hidden drifts. He was, Eliza realized, no simple drifter. A drifter didn't sit a $500 horse like he was born on it. A drifter didn't have eyes that missed nothing. Eliza's fear had been burned away, replaced by a cold, desperate resolve. Every time she felt like she would collapse, she would picture Croft's sneering face and the sacred hidden spring, and she would grip the saddle horn tighter. They arrived in Wilcox just as the sun, a bloody smear in the west, began to dip below the Dragoon Mountains. The town was a raw, muddy slash in the snow, a collection of false-fronted buildings, shipping pens, and saloons, all buzzing with the new energy of the coming railroad. They looked a sight. Eliza, with her hair wild and her face smudged with dirt. Cale, in his bloody buckskins, looking like a specter of vengeance. They left the horses, lathered and breathing hard, tied to the rail in front of the one-stop mercantile. "We need to get to the telegraph office," Eliza said, her teeth chattering. "It closes at 5. "No," Cale said, his eyes fixed on the town's largest, loudest establishment, the Golden Nugget Saloon. Croft's carriage was parked outside. "He's here, and the man I need to see is with him." "What?" "Cale, no. The money. The wire. The wire is in San Francisco. It's too late for that. The bank is closed. The clerk's office is closed. By the time I could get the money, the deadline would have passed. Then it's over," Eliza whispered, the fight draining out of her. "He's won." "He hasn't won yet," Cale said. "He thinks he's waiting for a deadline. He's actually waiting for me." He looked at her. "You have to trust me, Eliza. You saved my life. Now let me save your land." He started to walk toward the saloon. "Kyle, wait!" she cried, running after him. "You can't go in there, not dressed like that. They'll kill you. Croft will have you shot." "He's not the one I'm worried about." He pushed open the swinging doors of the Golden Nugget. A wall of noise, smoke, and heat hit them. The saloon was packed. Cowboys, miners, railroad men, and merchants were all crowded around the tables, drinking and gambling. A tinny piano was playing in the corner. The moment they stepped in, the music stopped. The talking stopped. Every eye in the saloon turned to them, to the respectable, if bedraggled young woman, and the terrifying Apache drifter at her side. We don't serve his kind in here," the bartender said nervously, wiping his hands on a dirty apron. Kyle ignored him. His eyes scanned the room, sweeping past the hostile faces, the curious stares. And then he found them. In the back, at the respectable table reserved for high-stakes poker and business, sat Silas Croft. He was laughing, a fat cigar in his hand, a glass of whiskey in the other. Sitting across from him were two men. One was Sheriff Brody, looking miserable. The other was a man in a pristine, expensive three-piece suit. He had a clean-shaven face, wire-rimmed glasses, and a stack of official-looking documents in front of him. Eliza felt Cale go rigid beside her. It wasn't a stiffening of fear. It was the coil of a snake before it strikes. "Cale," she whispered, "what's wrong?" "That man," Cale said, his voice so low she could barely hear it. "The one in the suit. He looks important." "Oh, he is," Cale breathed, his voice laced with a new, terrifying fury. "He's very important." Croft had seen them. His laughter died in his throat, and his face contorted in disbelief and rage. "Sheriff!" Croft bellowed, slamming his glass down. "I told you to arrest this thing. What is he doing in my town?" Sheriff Brody stood, his hand on his gun. "Son, you've got no business here. You and the lady should—" But Cale only had eyes for the man in the suit. He began to walk forward. The saloon was so quiet, you could hear the snow melting off his boots. The man in the suit looked up, annoyed by the interruption. His eyes met Cale's, and the color drained from his face. Mr. Blackwood?" the man stuttered, his jaw dropping. He half rose from his chair, knocking over his glass. Croft stared at his associate. "Blackwood? What are you talking about, Harding? This is just some Apache trash." "Mr. Blackwood," the man, Harding repeated, his voice trembling. "Sir, I don't understand. What are you doing here? Dressed like this?" Cale stopped at the table. He looked at Harding, the man in the suit. He looked at the stack of papers. He looked at Silas Croft, whose fat, confused face was cycling through emotions. And Eliza, standing frozen by the door, finally understood. Blackwood. She thought back. Kalen Blackwood. The Blackwood Mining and Land Company. The company that was buying up half of Arizona. The company the railroad answered to. The phantom millionaire from San Francisco that everyone was talking about. "Kalen Blackwood?" Croft whispered, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. No, it can't be." Cale looked at his chief surveyor, Mr. Harding, his own trusted employee. "Hello, Harding," Cale said, his voice soft, but carrying to every corner of the silent room. "You seem to be enjoying the local hospitality. A bit far from your survey route, aren't you?" "Sir, I was meeting with Mr. Croft about the land purchase." Harding was sweating, his eyes darting between Cale and Croft. "The land purchase," Cale repeated. He picked up one of the documents. It was a sales agreement. For one, Silas Croft to sell 2,000 acres of consolidated ranch land to the Blackwood Mining Company for the staggering price of $100,000. $100,000, Cale read, his voice dangerously calm. "For land you were planning to acquire for 50? The twist hit Eliza like a physical blow. Croft wasn't just stealing her land to own it. He was stealing it to flip it, to sell it to Cale's own company for a fortune. And Harding, Cale's own man, was in on it. He was the one who had appraised the land. He was the one who knew about the secret of the spring. He wasn't just colluding with Croft. He was betraying Cale. "Sir, you don't understand," Harding pleaded. "The land. It has a unique water source. It's incredibly valuable." "I know," Kyle said. "I've been there. The heart of the mountain. A Chiricahua holy site." He dropped the paper. He turned his gaze, the full, unbridled fury of his position, onto Harding. "You are going to let him steal a sacred site from this girl," he said, "and then sell it back to me using my own company's money. You are a traitor, Harding." "No, sir, please. You're fired. Get your things. If you are not on the morning stage out of this territory, I will have you arrested for fraud." Harding, white as a sheet, grabbed his hat and scrambled away, pushing through the stunned crowd. And then there was only Croft. Silas Croft was a bully and a coward, but he was also a cornered animal, and cornered animals are the most dangerous. He stared at Cale, his small eyes processing the scene. His partner had fled. The saloon was packed with men who just moments ago had been his subjects, but were now watching him with a new, hungry curiosity. His power, built on the illusion of wealth and influence, was evaporating. And it was being stolen by a man he'd called Reservation Dog. "Blackwood," Croft sneered, trying to reclaim some shred of dignity. He stood up, trying to match Cale's height, but he was a soft man, and Cale was forged steel. "So, the great millionaire plays dress-up, does he? Trawls the countryside like a common drifter?" "I was scouting my investments," Cale said, his voice flat and cold. "Something you and Harding were trying to turn into your own personal piggy bank." "It's just business," Croft blustered, appealing to the crowd. "The girl was too poor to keep the land. I was doing her a favor. I was consolidating." "You were stealing," Eliza's voice rang out. She stepped forward from the doorway, her fear gone, replaced by a righteous, vibrating anger. She walked past the gawking cowboys, past the silent bartender, and stood beside Cale. She was still in her worn, patched dress, but she held her head high, and in that moment, she was as imposing as he was. "You tried to let me freeze," she said, her voice clear and carrying. "You mocked my father. You called his home worthless dirt while you and him," she spat the word at the memory of Harding, "were planning to sell it for $100,000. The crowd murmured. This was a story they understood. A rich land baron, a crooked assessor, and a poor girl. It was the story of the West. But this time, it had a new, unexpected ending. "It's my land," Croft roared, his face modeling. "I hold the lien. The 24 hours are up. It's mine." "The 24 hours are not up," Cale said calmly. "It's barely sunset. The clerk's office is closed, but the debt is still valid." "And she," Croft jabbed a thick finger at Eliza, "doesn't have the money, so it defaults to me." "She doesn't," Cale agreed. "But I do." This was the moment. The saloon held its collective breath. Cale hadn't looked like a millionaire. He'd looked like a man who hadn't eaten in a week. But now, he reached inside the lining of his torn buckskin vest. His hand emerged, not with a weapon, but with a small, oilskin-wrapped pouch. He calmly unwrapped it on the poker table. And from it, he produced a second belt, a money belt, one that, until this moment, had been hidden beneath his clothes. He unfastened, tended, and, with a heavy thud, dropped it on the table. He unzipped a pocket. The entire saloon leaned in. It was packed, tight, with crisp, new $100 bills, bundles of them, more money than anyone in that room had ever seen in one place. The tax bill, Cale said, his voice casual, as if he were ordering a beer, is $50. He peeled off a single $100 bill and tossed it onto the table in front of Sheriff Brody. Sheriff, Cale said, please see that this bill is delivered to the county clerk's office first thing in the morning. Pay Miss Mayhew's back taxes. The change is a tip for your trouble. Sheriff Brody, his eyes as wide as saucers, looked at the bill. He looked at Croft. He looked at Cale. He swallowed, hard. Mr. Blackwood, Yes, sir. Of course, sir. He snatched the bill as if it were a hot coal. Kyle wasn't finished. He turned to Eliza. His voice, when he spoke to her, was different, softer. Eliza, he said, ignoring the entire room. I have just been spectacularly defrauded by my own chief surveyor. I find myself in need of a new, local partner. Someone who knows the land. Someone I can trust. He gestured to the pile of money. Silas Croft was going to sell your land he didn't even own, for $100,000. That seems to be the going rate. But I don't want to buy your land, Miss Mayhew. The spring, it's sacred to my people. It shouldn't be bought or sold. It should be protected. He looked her in the eye. I want to offer you a 50% partnership in the new Wilcox Valley Development Company. We will build a town. We will build it around your spring, and the water will be free for anyone who needs it. We will not sell to the railroad. The railroad will pay us for access. He slid a thick bundle of bills. Eliza couldn't even count how many, across the table. This is a $50,000 signing bonus as a down payment for your inconvenience. Eliza Mayhew stared at the money. It was a meaningless, impossible amount. It wasn't real. She looked at Cale's face. He was real. The man she'd pulled from the snow. She looked at Silas Croft. His face was a mask of pure apoplectic hatred. His world, his power, his entire future had just been snuffed out. You Apache, Croft screamed, his voice cracking. He had lost his mind. You think you can come in here with your filthy money and steal my valley? He didn't reach for his gun. He was a coward, not a gunfighter. He lunged, but he wasn't lunging for Cale. He was lunging for Eliza. He grabbed her, pulling her in front of him as a shield, his other hand fumbling for a derringer in his vest pocket. No one leaves. This is mine. It happened in less than a second. Cale didn't draw a gun. He didn't have one. The drifter half of him, the man who had survived an ambush and a blizzard, moved. He didn't move like a millionaire. He moved like a wolf. He grabbed the half-full, heavy whiskey bottle from Croft's place at the table. In one smooth, brutal motion, he stepped inside Croft's reach, smashed the bottle over the man's head, and at the same time hooked his leg around Croft's ankle. Croft's eyes rolled up, the derringer clattering to the floor. He went down like a felled ox, pulling Eliza with him. Kyle caught her, shoving her behind him as Croft collapsed in a heap of broken glass, whiskey, and shattered pride. The saloon was dead silent. Kyle stood over the unmoving form of Silas Croft, breathing hard, his good hand dripping whiskey. He looked at the sheriff, his eyes black fire. Sheriff Brody, Kalen Blackwood said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. I believe this man just assaulted Miss Mayhew, and I think you should arrest him. Sheriff Brody, finally seeing which way the wind was blowing, pulled out his handcuffs. Yes, sir, Mr. Blackwood. I believe I should. They left the saloon without a backward glance. They didn't take the money. Cale had simply left it on the table, a testament to his power, telling the bartender to hold it for Miss Mayhew until the bank opened. The walk to the mercantile was silent. The entire town of Wilcox seemed to be holding its breath, the news spreading from the saloon doors like a flood. People were peering out of windows, their expressions a mixture of awe and fear. Eliza's mind was a whirlwind. She felt lightheaded, as if she were floating. Millionaire, Harding, the spring, the money, the fight. Kyle stopped at the mercantile. "You need a room at the hotel," he said. "It's not safe to ride back tonight." A room?" Eliza repeated, feeling stupid. "Yes, and a hot meal, and a new dress." "Cale," she said, finally finding her voice. She stopped him, her hand on his arm. The buckskin was rough, still damp. "Why? Why did you do all that? The partnership? The money? You could have just bought the land. You could have just paid the tax and been a hero." Kyle looked at her, and for the first time, the hardness in his eyes softened. He looked up at the cold, pinprick stars. "When I came to your door," he said, his voice low, "I wasn't Calen Blackwood, the millionaire. I was just Cale, a man, freezing, a man who had been shot and left for dead, a man who had given up." He met her gaze. "You saved that man. You, who had nothing. You offered him your fire, your food, your whiskey. You stitched him up. You didn't ask what was in it for you. You just did. You showed me a kindness I haven't seen since—" He trailed off. "Since my mother. But the company, the partnership." "Eliza," he said, "that land is sacred. My family's blood is in that soil. I can't own it. Not like Croft wanted to. But I can protect it. And I can't protect it alone. I am a man of two worlds. The man in the suit, Harding, he represents my world of money and power. And he betrayed me." He gently touched the mended tear in his buckskin, the place where she had stitched him. "But the drifter, you were loyal to him. I need a partner who understands the land, not just the profit. Someone who knows what it's like to have nothing, and who, even then, is willing to give. I don't want your land, Eliza. I want your character, the Blackwood Company. I need that, more than I need water or gold." He smiled, a true, small smile. "Besides, I think the Mayhew Blackwood Development Company has a fine ring to it, don't you?" Eliza stared at him. He wasn't a savior. He wasn't a prince. He was a man, complicated and wounded, just like her. A man who had lost his heritage and had it sold back to him by his own employee. A man who was just as alone, in his own way, as she had been. She didn't cry. She didn't fawn. She didn't melt into his arms. She held out her chapped, raw hand. "A partnership, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice firm. 50-50. "And the first rule of our company? The spring always runs free." Kyle looked at her hand. This small, calloused, fiercely strong hand. He grasped it. His hand was warm, strong. It wasn't a handshake of a boss to an employee. It wasn't the hand of a man to a woman he'd rescued. It was the handshake of equals. "Partners," he agreed. They stood there for a moment in the frozen street, two outcasts who had, in the strangest of ways, just found a home. They had a town to build. They had a valley to protect. And for the first time in either of their lives, they had someone to stand with them while they did it. The poor young girl had saved a freezing Apache, and in doing so, had saved them both. And so, Eliza Mayhew and Calen Blackwood stood not as a poor girl and a rich man, but as partners, looking out over a valley that held both of their pasts and all of their future. Silas Croft's greed was the poison, but Eliza's compassion was the antidote. It just so happens that compassion was rewarded by a millionaire who was, himself, searching for something money could never buy. What do you think happened next? Did they build their town? Did their partnership ever become something more? Let me know your thoughts on the future of Mayhew Blackwood in the comments below. This story is a reminder that the greatest fortunes aren't made of gold, but of character. And sometimes, the most desperate-looking stranger at your door is the one person who holds the key to your entire future. If you enjoyed this journey to the Old West, and if you believe in the power of kindness, please do me a huge favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Share this story with a friend who loves a good twist. And most importantly, be sure to subscribe and ring that bell for more stories of drama, resilience, and the untamed frontier. We have new stories coming every week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Thank you for listening.